everyone, and welcome to an all-new Deep Cuts Live. I'm your host, Antoine Reid, and today we have on with us Brandon from Apostate Cigars. So I'm looking forward to chatting with him and learning more about his brand. It's kind of a newer brand to the market, so we have a lot to kind of chat about and learn about today. So let me get our guest on. Brandon, how are you?
Doing well. How are you?
I'm doing well. Like I said, thank you for coming on. I like to tell people how I encounter different brands. So you and I have never really spoken much, but we followed each other on Instagram. And when I was at the PCA trade show a couple months ago, I was walking around the trade show floor and I kept passing by your booth and it was super busy all like the whole time I was there. So every time I would walk by and say, are they free now? And it was just super busy. And like your booth was like one of the ones that had a line of like retailers like lined up ready to speak to you all. It reminded me a lot. I'm going to date myself when I say this, but it reminded me a lot of Toys R Us in the 80s. I don't know if people remember this, but
I remember.
Back in the 80s, there's a store called Toys R Us. And it was like the greatest store ever if you were a kid. Great for the action figures, great for video games. And every now and then Toys R Us will hold these events where they would have the characters from the Saturday morning cartoons like He-Man and
oh my God, I remember that.
And Ninja Turtles, and they would have them dress
Barbie.
up. And they had them dress up and positioned in different places around the store just to kind of get you to move around the store. Probably now when you're older, you kind of know why they did what they did, just to get you to move around the store. And while you were waiting, you were waiting in line to meet them and shake their hands and take pictures with them. That's what your booth was like, the whole trade show. So
no, Toys R Us was ahead of the game. Yeah, we're trying to capture that same magic, right?
So like I said, it was like super busy. And I just remember you had articles coming out about you all like on Half Wheel right before the show. So there was like a lot of buzz around your brand. So I'm very interested today in learning more because I'm always looking for new brands. And I hope people out there who are listening and watching are also interested in learning about new brands that are kind of on the market. So
well, we appreciate that. And I mean, it's guys like you know, the media outlets, the blogs and the YouTube channels plays a huge part in the hype. You know what I mean? Without you guys out there talking about who's new and what's hot and what's cool, we probably wouldn't have the same exposure. So thank you for doing what you do. We appreciate it.
No problem. I think a great place to start is, how did you get into cigars in general?
In general, so cigars became a hobby, a pastime, a passion, whatever you want to call it, back in about 2011 for me, 2010. I was working a desk job at UPS, and everyone I would talk to in the office had like their thing, right? Everybody had like something that they were kind of nerdy about, or that they would go home, you know, what it was, model trains or something, right? And I'm like, what's my thing? But I want it to be cool. I want it to be different. And I'm in Utah, right? I'm in Salt Lake City, Utah. The one thing that you don't hear a lot about, and that had always intrigued me as a little kid, is cigars. Like you see them in movies, you see them in TV, stuff like that. And I was like, you know what? I don't know what prompted it, but I was just like, what's up with cigars? And I wanted to get into it. So working at UPS at my desk job, I had the opportunity to just chill all day and listen to headphones. And I started listening to podcasts about cigars. That's where I picked up Stogie Geeks back in the early days for Coop, you know. So it kind of went downhill from there, man, or uphill, or however you want to say it.
Uphill.
Yeah. Not downhill in a bad way, downhill in a momentum way, right? So my wife that year got me a little, you know, care package of a humidor and like 20 various cigars and a cutter and a lighter, because she saw me being nerdy about it, and not a lot of locations to buy cigars locally in Utah. So she hopped online and got me a little birthday gift, and it was game over, man. Lights out, done. After I smoked that first cigar, I was like, okay, yep, this is my thing. I wanted it to be my thing, and now I really want it to be my thing. So that's how I got into it.
It's funny you say that, because I think a lot of us with a certain age bracket, I was trying to think of a nice way of saying it, like we encountered cigars, you know, in cartoons and movies before there was such a crackdown on that kind of representation in movies. And to the point now where it's like, if you see a character in a TV show or movie smoking a cigar now, it feels like a big deal because you just don't see. I mean, there's like warnings now, like when you turn on a movie or
Right.
TV show, it's like this show has depictions of tobacco in it.
Yeah.
And it's
Containing
funny.
smoking, images of smoking. Like you have to
I
warn the
know.
kids to look away, right? Yeah.
Well, it's funny because I was watching Star Trek Picard, a science fiction show, and
Great show.
one of the characters in that, for those who haven't watched it, for at least the first 2 seasons, I know season 3 will be out in February, so people who are watching afterwards won't see that character, but he smoked cigars in it, and I remember seeing it as like that was such a big deal. There was some,
Right.
you know, because it was like cigars make it to the future somehow. But
Right. Yeah. They made it.
I know.
They
I think
existed.
something like Romeo and Julieta.
Uh,
I think, but it's such strange. But it's funny how we all kind of, like I said, encounter that, and Bugs Bunny and
yeah.
and
Tom
Looney
and Jerry.
Tunes,
You know,
Tom and
remember Tom and
Jerry.
Jerry? Yeah.
And it was just like common. It wasn't like anything bad and stuff. Like, so you would never see something like that now. And
yeah, we weren't worried about the kids as much back then, were we? Yeah.
no. Like, there's a lot of stuff if you look back at those TV shows and stuff that you're like, like
that would never fly now.
it would not go today. It's funny because even when I watch, you know, on the rare occasion I'm able to catch something like Live with Kelly and Ryan.
Mm-hmm.
Kelly Ripa has this moment always where she's like doing like the fake smoking thing, and I'm like,
right.
I'm sure that her producers say like, let's not do that a lot, but she always does.
Yeah,
like
someone's like, we need to.
Oh.
You're gonna piss off the moms.
Exactly. But
Yeah.
that's cool. But that's cool that you, like you say, everybody has their thing. But it's interesting that you chose your thing to be cigars.
It was just, yeah, it was kind of a curiosity. I don't know, man. I was playing like chess at the time, so maybe I'm the chess guy, right? Or so, you know, I didn't want to be like a guy, but I wanted to have a thing that I could talk about. And people are like, so what are you into? I'm like, you know what? I really enjoy premium cigars. That was a cool thing for me to be able to say and enjoy, and actually like have curiosity about it and learn about it. And it took me on an adventure all of its own that I never expected, you know? So it's cool. And here we are.
So what was that? Do you remember what the first premium cigar that you smoked was?
The cigar that made me a cigar smoker, that made me want to like buy in, it was the Aroma de Cuba, Mi Amor by Ashton. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that was when because I'd smoked a few, you know, some, I don't remember, some older Romeo and Julieta stuff. It was okay. Mm-hmm. But that Aroma de Cuba, I was like, oh, okay. It surprised me.
What about it appealed or jumped out to you, like you said, compared to some of those other cigars that you had smoked? Some
of the others had a little bit, I would call them one-dimensional, mm-hmm. right? So when I smoked a cigar, I was like, okay, cool. So that's what a cigar tastes like. But when I got to the Aroma de Cuba, and this was, 2011, this was right when that brand was getting a lot of hype and getting a lot of attention. The tobacco was richer. It was more flavorful, and it had some change ups. It had some things that surprise you as you smoke it. So you didn't get one flavor profile through the whole smoke. It had the change ups. It had those rich, dark kind of chocolate coffee notes happening. And my palate hadn't experienced that to that point. And I didn't know a cigar could do that. I didn't know that was something you could do on purpose. So it surprised me enough to get me really curious. And then I started smoking everything.
So how did you go from being just a cigar consumer to actually working in the industry?
So that I was working for a couple corporate jobs, and it got to a point where.
Oh, I think we lost him. He'll come back.
There we are.
Yeah.
All right. So I took a little bit of time off. About 3 months I wasn't working. This was back in 2015. Mm-hmm. And during my time off from the corporate world, trying to figure out what I was going to do to put bread on the table and not drive myself nuts to make a living, I was smoking a lot of cigars. I was smoking a couple a day. And I was buying them from 2 retailers in my local area. The one that impressed me as far as like things you couldn't get somewhere else was a place called Beehive Cigars. It had, at the time, I didn't know the difference between legacy and boutique, but they had kind of latched on to some of the smaller brands that were offering things that were unique that I hadn't seen anywhere else. So it kept me going back and trying new stuff. And I'm sitting there that 3 months just trying to figure out what I want to do with myself. And I'm like, well, shit, man, I'm spending money on cigars every day. How do I get paid to do that? Like, how do I get paid to make that a part of my everyday? So I talked to the owner of Beehive to see if he needed some help. He didn't need help at the time, so I was kind of disheartened. But then luckily he called me a couple of weeks later. He had somebody quit. He was like, I'd love to interview you and see how it fits. And we were fast friends from day one. It just clicked. So I came into Beehive. I started running the place. About 4 or 5 months into it, I was the general manager, and then it was a few years of that, helping the business grow, curating the humidor, doing the purchasing, doing the buying, planning all the events. So it just kind of became what you do. It's that every day. I mean, you've been to your local retailer, you see what they juggle. That was for me, and I loved it. Loved every bit of it.
I think that's interesting because to learn like the craft, it's almost like you have to do your time. And
yeah,
we live in a society that like you get an idea for a business and you're just like, I'm gonna jump right in. We're gonna go for it. Like next week it's just gonna be like 100%. And it's like, take your time, learn the craft. And people don't always want to do that. So like kudos to you to saying like, hey, I like cigars, but I might want to go take this into a career, and I'm willing to like work in retail to kind of like learn the industry.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things where like if you're doing something that like if you're not at work but you're thinking about it because you enjoy it, you know what I mean? If you're thinking about doing something or you're wondering how it's going while you're gone, I feel like that means you're in the right place. You know what I mean? And for me, when I wasn't working a shift at Beehive, I wanted to be at Beehive. That's where my community was now. That's where my new friends were. That's where people who I had something in common with were gathering. So it just felt like a natural step, and I was lucky that I was getting paid to do it. That was a bonus, right? So I would have worked for cigars. Don't tell Kendrick, but
So when you worked, in retail, did you get to? I know some retailers get to go on trips, to different factories and kind of see to better understand what's in their humidor. Did you get to go on any trips like that to kind of see where the cigars that were in the humidor were actually made and how they were made?
Yeah, I did. I went on a couple of trips. The one that stands out the most and probably impacted my wanting to go further in the industry was the 2017 tour we did with Perdomo. Nick Perdomo's,
yeah. You said trips. I was like, I think I just wheeled it. I was like, it's going to be Perdomo. It's going to be Perdomo because that's like always the ultimate. I haven't done it yet, but I hear that like that's like the ultimate kind of factory.
I mean, it depends on what you're trying to get out of it, right? If you're looking for just a good time and you want to learn a little about cigars and see a few of the steps, stuff like that, there's safaris and stuff like that, or little, like Pro Cigar. You're going to go to dinner every night. You're going to have a party and that kind of stuff. You'll do a factory tour, but it's not as in depth. If you want, like, here's the business. Here it is from seed to shipping, and everything in between. And this is where we make the boxes, and this is how we ferment, and this is why and for how long. Nick Perdomo, I'm telling you, that factory tour, that's not a factory tour. That's a cigar university in a weekend down there. It's pretty intense. So that kind of helped foster my curiosity. It helped me, like, once you see behind the curtain that way a little bit, you have a deeper appreciation for it. And I think it makes you want to learn even more. So yeah, that Perdomo factory tour was definitely a pretty big catalyst for me wanting to go further.
Yeah. And I always feel like I wish more even consumers got to go on trips like that because I think any creative person kind of encounters this, is that you spend so much time making something and creating something, and then the person who consumes it spends a fraction of that time, actually consuming that thing, whether it's
and that's where the tobacconist comes in, right? And that's beneficial for a tobacconist to go on those trips, and that's why they do it, because you can speak to the cigar and the culture and the company in the humidor while you're selling the product. But like you said, if you can get a consumer on one of those trips, and that Perdomo tour had several consumers from some other shops that were there, I mean, you can just see it click for them, and you can see like, oh wow, I had no idea that all of that went into what I just spent $15 on to set on fire. You know, like it's cool to see the dots connect, and you get a customer for life out of that kind of stuff.
Exactly. Yeah, I've done. Yeah, I think my first one was a Davidoff trip back in
Oh
2019. Where
yeah,
it was like several days. Like we did a
yep,
field one day, we did the factory another day, we did, at night it was dinner, but it was also like going through each night had a different cigar where you
right,
would like, walk through, and it was very educational for me
yep,
because up to that point I had just read about stuff or seen some YouTube clips, but to
yeah.
actually be there and see it and understand when they say quality control, this is what they mean by quality control. Like not every cigar.
Exactly. Yeah. What does quality control look like? Yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
And
How they
color
sort the
sorting.
tobacco.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's a cool process. Any retailer and any consumer that gets the opportunity to do one of those tours, I don't care if it's the most basic tour ever, do it. Like absolutely do it. I mean, there's cost involved, but if you can afford it, go for it. It'll change your perspective.
So what came after your retail experience?
So the retail, I actually went straight from retail into Kendrick and I deciding that we wanted to launch our own brand. So I was GM over at Beehive for a few years, and during those years, we had always talked about, messing around and maybe doing our own blends. Those factory tours that you were talking about, we did a lot. We made a lot of good connections out of those. We've been, PDR, La Galera, Quesada. We've seen all those factories, La Aurora. Those are all places that we've been, and you get to build relationships with people. So we'd always talked about doing, our own house blends, just something for Beehive. And then we got an opportunity to sit down with Jochy Blanco and talk about making it bigger. Instead of just doing a Beehive exclusive, we understood that we were faced with an opportunity to kind of maybe take our spin on what we think a good cigar would look like and what it would taste like, and go bigger and give it to whoever wants it. So it kind of organically grew into us forming Apostate Cigars in 2020. That year was 2020, so it was hard to get a lot done, right? But 2021 is when we started blending and started making trips and doing production, and then we hit shelves this last December. So I went straight from running Beehive Cigars as the general manager to co-founder and vice president of Apostate. It was a pretty seamless switch there.
Now, I know you had worked with Kendrick up to that point anyway, but this is this is a completely different business, almost like different requirements, different attention that you have to put to it. How did you know, from your side, because we can't get Kendrick's side, but how did you know that Kendrick was like the person that you wanted to do this next kind of phase chapter with? Because I think a lot of people struggle sometimes with business ideas, and they have friends or they have people that they work with, and they're like, yeah, maybe this person would be good for a business partner, but it's still a big leap to kind of go from like a.
It is.
So
it is a big leap.
It was that he was like the one that you needed to do this with.
That's a great question, and I'm glad you asked, because I don't get to praise Kendrick as my partner as often as I would like. So he's one of the smartest people I've ever met. He's definitely the most creative person I've ever met. And he's already got the background of running a business behind him, right? He took Beehive for 13 years from a little closet humidor in another part of town to easily the biggest humidor in the state of Utah. Kendrick did that. You know what I mean? That's a lot in a state that doesn't want you to smoke, in a state that's got one of the highest taxes in the country at 86%. To watch him and help him, grow a business that by all accounts shouldn't succeed here and make it thrive, I knew obviously he's the right guy if you want to talk business. So from there, it was pretty easy to say, hey, creatively, we're good at bouncing ideas off each other already. As far as tobacco goes, we've smoked thousands of cigars by default because we have to, because we're retailers. So our palate is good. We're probably going to do okay at blending something that we like and we think customers would like. We've got relationships in place already. Like everything was kind of leading us that direction. There really weren't a lot of cons. There weren't a lot of reasons for us to say, no, he's not the guy I want to work with. I mean, and we get along famously. He's my best friend, honestly. People say don't work with your friends, but we hold each other accountable. Sometimes it's brutal. It has to be, you know what I mean? You got to be honest with each other all the time and keep each other accountable. But that dude, I tell him all the time, and I mean it. If it wasn't him, it wouldn't be anybody else. I honestly, I can't see me doing this with anybody else.
I like how you said that you admitted that sometimes it is brutal, as you just said, but it's business. Because I was having this discussion with someone a couple of days ago about, friends working with each other, and there's so many people who think it's like a great idea because, like, I know this person, I trust this person, but then when it comes to like some of the tough decisions, they struggle with saying like, okay, I know that you feel very strongly about this, or you always done it this way, but we really need to do it a different way. And it's just it's like an uncomfortable feeling, especially it's like less uncomfortable if you don't know the person or if you're not friends with that person.
Right.
When it gets like uncomfortable, when like the more familiar you are with that person, because you're like, I don't
you have something to lose.
Right,
yeah,
exactly.
Yeah. No, and I think that's always something that you have to keep it in mind, but that's a relationship that is easy to maintain. We're both good at compartmentalizing. When we're in the office and you have to set the ego and the friendship aside, you just do it, because it's either do it and figure it out, or the company flounders. You know what I mean? So what are your priorities? The friendship will be fine. The friendship happens outside of the office door. You know what I mean? The friendship maintains itself. At that point, it's business. Like you said, you've got to be responsible. You've created a thing, and now you're responsible for the care of that thing, right? So how do we best care for Apostate Cigars? You gotta put the ego and the friendship and the personal shit aside.
Exactly. When you started, when it was suggested to you that you could take this brand into a whole different direction, not just a house blend, but something national, something bigger. It seems like that will cause that will call for a financial commitment that maybe you weren't accounting for. So how did you handle that? Because I think like in the cigar business, we never hear about money really, and
right.
I know that that's a big barrier for entry for lots of brands, because
sure,
it just costs a lot of money to get product out there and to maintain that.
Yeah, it does. It absolutely does. That's where good relationships come in. But it's also one of those, like, the other thing you see on the other end of the spectrum is these guys who maybe money's never been an issue. Money's not an object, right? You've got a couple million here and there. Maybe you're a retired athlete or something, right? We're being hypothetical. I'm not calling anyone out, but it's easy sometimes for those guys to be like, yeah, I would really like to get into distributing a cigar, and kudos to them for being able to do it. That was not my situation, and that certainly wasn't Kendrick's situation. For us, that required sitting down with our families and saying, hey, this is what we want to do. We're pretty serious about it. We think it can work. It's going to require some financial sacrifice, but if we treat it right and we do it well, the sacrifice should pay off, right? So yeah, I mean, that's the thing that's scary for now, not just me, and it's not scary for Kendrick and just him. That's food on the table for the kids is a concern, shit like that. So yeah, man, we decided to make sacrifice and buy in. So yeah, we both brought financial to the table to get it going, and we're still young, but we think we're going to be okay.
Now, I know that you obviously knew a lot about the industry, having worked in retail, but when you were making the transition to brand owners and manufacturers, what was the one thing that kind of took you by surprise that even as a retailer you didn't really know?
I mean, you get a glimpse as a retailer of, like, kind of on the manufacturing side, how everyone knows everyone, right? There's that sense that it's a small, big world, right? So when you get to the other side of the table, suddenly conversations change gears a little bit, and everybody does know everybody, and if something's going down, everybody knows about it, So it's really, you got to keep your nose clean. the best advice I ever got was put your head down and stay in your lane and ignore the bullshit. And that's really what we're trying to do. You know what I mean? It's too easy to, buy into the who's doing what with their brand and worrying about stuff like that. It's like, we learned pretty quickly that like it's all very connected. So you gotta fly straight. And that's not hard. Just don't be an asshole, like
I know. Well, we say I sit here and say I know, and there's people out there that says like, oh, of course, but
right.
it's really hard. Like once you kind of get into like the machine of the industry, that sometimes you do get caught up in the drama, or sometimes you do.
Right. And that's the thing is like when you say drama, I mean, how bad can it really get? Right. It's not that
Right.
we're talking about premium cigars. It's impressed me that it's more of a family dynamic than anything. Sometimes it's a dysfunctional family, but it is most of these manufacturers, as much as people want you to think there's beef or like butting heads. Yeah, that happens. But man, these guys all love each other. Like everybody in this industry on the manufacturing side of the table, they're all working together. There's more collaboration than butting heads. And I love seeing that. That's the part that excites me, is who you get to work with. So.
And I tell people like, if you go to the trade show, for example, and I've heard this from other industries outside of the tobacco industry or the cigar industry in particular, you go to a trade show and all the companies are there exhibiting or doing what they're doing. And then they break out afterwards and they go to their own respective corners. They go to their own restaurants. They socialize. And when you go to something like the PCA trade show afterwards, it's like, everybody converges on like the one little bar that's in the hotel. Yeah. You see people having dinner together. You see people having drinks. People do go out and do their own thing, but they'll come back. And I've known people to like and I'm saying when I say people, I mean people from different industries. So it's almost like you get to see all the celebrities from the cigar industry. They all kind of are socializing. They're talking until like 1, 2, 3, 4 in the morning. Sometimes.
Yeah. It's fun, man. It's cool because when is everybody together like that? You know what I mean? These are all people that you have conversations with here and there, but now you're all in the same room in the same place for the same reason. And you're excited because the retailers are there and the retailers are excited. 'Cause it's cool, man. Like there's no party like a PCA party. I'll tell you that right now.
So how did you and Kendrick choose the name for your company? Because I feel like names are like the hardest part of any business, and people don't really realize until you're sitting there trying to name, and you're trying to think of trademark stuff. You're trying to think of what if anybody else has done this in the past. Even me picking the name of this podcast was like, I was like, I don't like what do I do? Like,
you got to scour the internet a little bit. You got to do
How did you settle on the name?
So I mean, the backstory for where the name comes from, Kendrick and I, obviously we both grew up in Utah. When you grow up in Utah, odds are you're part of the predominant religion out here, right? And so that was the case for both of us. We didn't know each other at the time, but we had pretty parallel lives growing up in this religion. We're the same age. He did what they call serve a mission for the church. He went to Scotland to preach the church to people over there. I was lucky enough to go to Dominican Republic. And I got to learn Spanish. I got to live there for, a year and a half and speak the language, learn the culture. So I didn't know at the time that 20 years later, my livelihood would come from that. But growing up religious and then leaving the church like you do, you grow, you ask questions, you find out maybe something's not right for you. And that was the case for both Kendrick and I separately. When you leave a religion, they have a nice little term for you. It's called an apostate. An apostate is someone who has basically turned their back on the faith or walked away from the light, right? You're a rebel now. You've walked away from the truth. So in Utah, I was people called me that to my face when I left the church. They were like, "Oh, you're an apostate. You're probably going to go to hell." Like,
oh my gosh,
people full on said that to me. You know what I mean? So it's like, if that's what you're going to call me, when it came time to name the brand, when we decided to launch, in the church, you're not. They don't want you smoking. They don't want you drinking. None of the vices are okay. So, I mean, we're doing all that, right? We're having fun. We figured we'd kick the door in and own it with the name Apostate. It's just fitting for, who we are. We're not trying to disrespect anybody or make fun of any religion or anything like that. But that's our story too. You know what I mean? We came from that too. It shaped who we are a little bit, right? So we feel like we should be allowed to tell that story however we want to tell it. And so apostates we are. Yeah.
That's cool. Cause so you took like a hard situation, something that's again uncomfortable,
Mhm.
some resistance in your life, and you turn that into kind of embrace that scarlet letter
Yeah.
per se, and made it kind of your banner or your mantra to motivate you and
Yeah.
to represent this new business that you're doing.
Yeah, we want it to be empowering. You know what I mean? I mean, and not to get too long winded about it, but when you walk away from a faith that dominated the bulk of your life, that's your community, right? Those are your people, and now you don't have that. Now that's gone. Now you're an alien on the outside. For me, and I've heard Kendrick say it too. I didn't find a sense of community again until I found premium cigars and I started going to lounges and shops and fitting in with that crowd. That was my community at that point. So to me, it's replacing, something negative with something empowering. And that's you can call me an apostate, but I'm not ashamed of that.
Now, you just mentioned that you spent some time in the Dominican Republic before
Mhm.
you got into the cigar industry.
I did.
So, like, when you were down in the Dominican Republic, did you ever encounter any of the cigar culture there, or was
Yeah.
it just like I would think? I was about to say because I think there are certain places where I think it would be hard not to run into cigars. And things like the
Yeah,
Dominican
I mean,
Republic.
when you're when you're a bright-eyed, 20-year-old little church boy, and you're in a foreign land and you're told to avoid certain things, you keep your head down and you get some tunnel vision pretty good, right? You
Mhm.
pretend that the girl crossing the street wasn't the most beautiful girl you've ever seen because you got to be good, right? So yeah, I mean, you notice the tobacco, right? You see the guys. I was in a region called La Vega. I lived in Santiago. I mean, I lived in the same neighborhood that Jochy Blanco lives in now. I was just down the road, right? So it's as much as I was like guided and told to not pay attention to it, you see it. It's there. It's who they are. It's part of the culture. You can't avoid it. So yeah, I definitely saw it. But like I said, I had no idea that 20 years later I was going to be making a living doing it. It's
But
kind
you
of fun.
said that experience enabled you to kind of learn Spanish,
Mm-hmm.
like kind of become familiar with the culture. So I would think that would be extremely helpful now because
Mm-hmm.
when you're dealing with the factories and the people down there, it helps to speak Spanish a lot of times.
It
Like
does.
you're not always lucky enough to have somebody who speaks English.
Right.
Um, in certain factories. I mean, certain factories they have English speaking people, but it's easier sometimes for you to be able to speak Spanish to communicate certain things and kind of you don't have to worry about that language barrier. Because I
Yeah.
know sometimes there is a language barrier where you're trying to explain something. You're like, what's the Spanish word for this? And you're
Right.
sitting there
Right.
and they're like, come on, come on, come on.
Yeah. No, it's fun. And it's funny because when I got back from doing the missionary thing down there in the Dominican Republic, it seemed like every job I had after that, I had the opportunity to use my Spanish in a significant way. So I never stopped speaking the language. I've spoken Spanish fluently for 20 years. So it feels like it's more comfortable going down there. Kendrick doesn't speak Spanish, but he's learning. And the one thing he says every time we go down there is that he wishes he spoke it so that I'll be in a conversation with somebody maybe in the production floor in the rolling area, and I'll have to stop and remember that I'm speaking Spanish and explain to him what we've just been talking about. So if there wasn't that back and forth, it would certainly make things easier. But like you said, man, there's plenty of people down there that speak English. They're fully capable of communicating, but it is nice to be a tatted up bearded white guy walking through there speaking Dominican Spanish and making heads turn a little bit. It's always kind of funny.
Now, when you were down there on the mission, I hope that's the right terminology for it.
Yeah. Mhm.
What were you like? Were you by yourself during that time, or
No, so LDS missionaries, in order to have accountability and kind of keep each other out of trouble, you're living with what they call a companion. You have a roommate, basically.
okay?
So you go out in pairs. Yeah, there's always two of you. Mhm.
Yeah, because I was about to say I would think that would be a little bit isolating, like,
Yeah, yeah.
and that could affect your psyche, like,
Oh yeah. I mean,
and
even being with a partner, you still get homesick and you feel isolated and you feel lonely and discouraged. You know what I mean? Especially, you're with somebody who's also in a foreign country, right? So it's like you got to sort of comfort each other a little bit, encourage each other. Luckily, I lived with people who were pretty cool, pretty laid back. So it was a fun learning experience, man. I wouldn't trade it for anything. I'm not religious anymore, but that is one thing that obviously benefits me now, and I wouldn't trade it.
Awesome. So when you all came up with the name,
Mm-hmm.
you agreed to this plan that you know, instead of going house clean, you're going to go bigger. What was the next step that you kind of took in the process of getting this brand, like I said, into a reality?
So from there we did, you know, obviously you got to do the marketing and you got to come up with like your logo design and what format, you know, what's your format going to be? Are we going to do boxes? Are we going to do how many cigars in a box? How are we going to distribute this stuff? So you have to go through all the logistics. But the next natural step for us was going down and meeting with Jochy Blanco at Tabaclaera Palma, who manufactures for us now. He was the first meeting and really the only meeting. After we met with him, obviously we had some other people that we would have talked to, but after meeting with him, it just felt like a good fit. He was excited to work with us. We were excited to work with him. From there, we took that first meeting in like March of 2021. And before we left, we were blending cigars. I mean, he was like, well, let's go right now. And we blended our first 3 cigars on that trip. So it was like, it was go time. Yeah. And then from there, you know, because it was in the middle of a pandemic, we had plenty of time to work on, you know, the packaging and everything like that came after.
So how long did it take you to kind of settle on the blends that you did?
We spent, for those 3 blends, we spent a good 4 days revisiting and dialing it in. It was we were lucky, you know what I mean? We've got Jochy Blanco and his son, Jose Manuel. Jose Manuel's like 22, 23, and that dude knows more about tobacco than his dad. You know what I mean? Like that kid knows a lot of stuff. So we were lucky to have people there to kind of guide us as far as what the blending process should look like. Ultimately, it was Kendrick and I who locked in, you know, the final blends and decided what tobacco was going into it. But we wouldn't have been able to get there without guidance from those guys. So we had some help for sure. Now we feel like we're at a comfortable point where when we go down there and we're looking at production and stuff like that, we can step in and say, hey, we want to try this and this, and they give us pretty free reign to mess around and do what we want to do. So, but yeah, it only took us less than a week.
One thing I've been particularly interested in terms of just not even just the cigar industry, but any business, is distribution.
Mm-hmm.
Because like you can have like the best product ever, or the best, you know, anything, like the best podcast, the best, you know, music album ever. But if you don't have a good distribution plan, you kind of fall flat. So
who's going to help you get it out there? Yeah.
Yeah. So how did you all approach the distribution part of your
product? We got lucky there too, man. It's funny. Like in this whole journey, I feel like the dominoes fell for us. We didn't even have to knock any over. We were at PCA. No, we were at TPE. This was after we had gone down to blend. Mm-hmm. TPE had been pushed to like May, right? Mm-hmm. So it was a little later in the year than normal. And we were hanging out after the show at the bar at TPE. And we wanted to talk to Dion with Illusion because we're in Utah and Dion's in Nevada. He's right there. We knew that he had set up a free trade zone and that he was distributing. We were going to distribute ourselves. We were just going to, you know, get a warehouse space, show up and package stuff ourselves, have it shipped to us. But we had, you know, specific questions about how to accomplish it. Dion happened to walk into the bar. Like, you never see Dion at the bar at the show, by the way. He's a solitary guy. He wants to do his thing. Mm-hmm. That was the first time I've ever seen him at a bar. So he walked through and we were just chatting with him. We're like, hey man, good to see you. And we've done business through Beehive with him for years. So he knew who we were. And we were like, we want to pick your brain about distributing. What advice can you give us? How can we get started? And he's like, what are you talking about? Let me distribute for you. So we're like, okay, cool. That solves that problem. You know, that's a lot easier than us trying to do it ourselves. So it just worked out, man. And we feel really blessed. You know, Fumari International, Illusion, that's who's distributing for us out of Reno. And they do a great job. They do an awesome job. They distribute guys like Cavalier, 1502. They're doing a wonderful job over there. So we'd be lost without them, to be honest with you.
And when it comes to getting the word out about your brand, like you mentioned at the beginning of the show, like you kind of rely on the media. How are you approaching marketing? Because I think marketing today is so hard for a lot of people, because it used to be like you just run an ad in a magazine,
Right.
and people would just, I guess, flock to you because that was the main means. But now people's attention spans are, you have magazines, you have podcasts, you have
Right.
videos, you have social media, and thousands of different platforms. And within that, you have influencers. So what's
Right.
working for you in terms of marketing? Like, what did you kind of learn? And also, like, what did you kind of, try out that didn't work as well as you thought it would?
So for us, it's been pretty organic. Luckily, we've got the retail shop in Beehive Cigars, and so that's kind of like our home base, right? That's our mothership. So we knew we were going to sell a lot of the brand out of there. The good thing about Beehive is we get a lot of walk-ins who are just in town, for a couple of days. It's 8 minutes away from Salt Lake City International Airport, so we get a lot of foot traffic for people coming and going. So that helps. But yeah, no, it's really social media, Instagram, Facebook, and then trade shows like TPE and PCA. Those really help as well. I think we've seen the most attention though from just getting out on the road. That's the bulk of my job description right now is doing the traveling. So what I'll usually do is look at a region where we don't have a lot of retail accounts, pick an area, call up some shops, say, hey, I'm Brandon, introduce the brand, ask if they've heard of us, get some samples sent to them, and then give it a couple of weeks, maybe a month or two, and then I'm on the road in that area, and I'm showing up to that shop and just spreading the word. And then from there, that's where the social media comes in. Hey, I'm at, Tobacco Road in Sacramento today. Come see me, come support Z. Or I'm at Tobacco Republic in Loomis. Come see Ron and the guys. It's you have to kind of use all of it in order to promote everybody. If we help take care of the retail shops, they turn around and help take care of us. So for me, promoting local retailers and getting into the hands of people who maybe have a following on Instagram or just know how to spread the word. It's been pretty organic. We had a full page ad in Cigar Journal. Thanks to my friend Bruce Bush, who's running things for K by Karen Berger. Got us into Cigar Journal, so that helped. We popped a pretty decent rating from Boston Jimmy over at Stogie Press. Gave us a 96 on our Maduro. That definitely helped. We saw a huge uptick after that. So, it's things where you want to make an effort to market, but you don't want to stretch out too far either, right? Okay. Especially it's really expensive to run an ad in a magazine. We don't have the capital to do that right now. So we'll get there.
I heard a lot of people say that social media works a little bit more because it's affordable. Like it doesn't cost you anything to do Instagram really, unless you hire somebody to help you. So I'm always curious about how people are getting out the word, because there's so many choices of cigars out there and brands to choose from now. Like, in the past, it seemed like there was not as much variety, and that, new companies kind of struggled, but now there's so many new companies, there's so many new brands. I mean, you walk PCA trade show, you walk TPE, you see so many different things. You encounter new stuff all the time, and you're just like, wow, So I would imagine that being in your position, that I know you don't probably worry about competition, but there's a lot of other cigars out there that you have to bolster yours up. So hopefully, like you said, all those different means that you use are getting spread out.
Well, and I think honestly, like to toot our horn a little, which I don't do often, I think the best marketing you can have is a good product. Really. I tell my retailers when I'm meeting with them for the first time, I tell them all the time, look, man, it's up to you. You know what will work in your humidor or not. If you will sell it to a customer the first time, it's on me to make sure that they come back and buy it that second time. All I can do is give you a good product and make sure that they come back. You do the effort the first time, the rest is on me. And I'm confident that the rest being on me is something that has worked out so far. So a good product is great marketing all by itself, for sure.
For you, what makes a good cigar? Because I think that's like a basic question that people would go, oh, like, what do you mean what makes a good cigar? But what makes a cigar good in your opinion?
That's a great question, man. For me, as a consumer, my focus is quality versus cost, right? Are you getting what you paid for? Are you paying too much for what you're getting? Or could you be paying more for whatever you just enjoyed, right? So quality versus cost is a huge one. I look for balance in my cigars, so I don't want something to be purely strength or purely flavor. There's got to be a good marriage between the two. I want it to be able to be like, if I'm smoking that cigar, am I sitting back and enjoying it and really taking it in? Like, what's my experience while I'm smoking that cigar? Is it helping me relax? Is it helping me have good conversation with people in the room? Or am I fighting with the thing? Am I unable to smoke it? Is the burn weird? Is it sour? Am I just not enjoying it? Right. So really, regardless of what I pick up or how much I paid for it, it becomes not so much about what the cigar is, but what the cigar does, right? What kind of experience is it helping facilitate? That's probably my biggest benchmark. And I think when you smoke Apostate, you kind of get pulled into it because they are unique. We've taken our time to make unique blends that, and obviously there's a finite amount of tobacco. Everybody's got a lot of the same stuff to work with, but what's your personal touch? And, so we like to use San Andres as a binder, even on our Connecticut or on the Candela that I'm smoking now. San Andres binder will kind of give it a little more complexity. We didn't put any Ligero in the Feathered Serpent in the Candela. So it's a mellow smoke, but it's very flavorful. It doesn't burn too hot. I don't know, man. There's a lot of things that go into it. Like, what makes it for you? The same question coming back to you. What do you like about what you would call a good cigar?
For me, is I don't want to have to relight it 10,000 times. so
Right.
Can it stay lit?
Right.
I'm not big. I'm not at the level yet to pick out flavor notes and all that kind of stuff, but I don't want it to stick to the roof of your mouth and feel like you just inhaled an ashtray.
Right. Right.
So it's things like that. Like, I like a nice, if you can get that nice burn line where it's not jagged or weird and stuff like that. So it's like construction, I think, is my big thing. Just because
construction is a huge
person.
Yeah. And I've heard a lot of consumers say the same thing. I said the same thing. You know what I mean? I don't care if it's 15-year-old tobacco from Castro's cellar. If you can't smoke it, if it's just unsmokable, it doesn't matter. So yeah, construction is huge. And that's one of the reasons that we wanted to work with Jochy Blanco. I mean, his construction's impeccable. I've had one or two that'll burn a little crooked to start off, but they always correct themselves. I haven't had any plugged cigars. I don't have a plethora of customers reaching out to me saying, hey, I couldn't smoke this. I had one or two, but it's a hand-rolled product, right? I mean, it's going to happen once or twice. It's unrealistic to think otherwise, but consistency of construction, quality of tobacco, I think that all leads to a pretty pleasant smoking experience.
And can you walk us through the different cigars that you all have right now, and then kind of pretend like it's somebody that's a little bit new to smoking? So
yeah,
tell them, like, if it's not for a beginner smoker, like if it's a little bit on the stronger side, maybe mention that they know when they go into a retailer to purchase your cigars, they know kind of what might appeal to them and their palate a little bit more.
Yeah, totally. We can give you a flavor guide for sure. Yeah. So the first cigar we blended is a Habano. It's called the Initiatory. It's a 6x52 Toro. All our blends come in one size per blend. We're doing one Vitola to showcase the flavor of that blend. You're not going to find 4 or 5 sizes. So the Initiatory is a 6x52 Toro. It's got an Ecuadorian Sumatra wrapper, Mexican San Andres binder, and then all Dominican filler. So it's a very straightforward, very smooth Dominican cigar. It's got the filler tobacco in there is 5 years old before it was even rolled. So it's perfect, man. It's good for after lunch. It's good for after dinner. I've smoked them in the morning. I would say it's probably a medium to medium plus on the strength scale. It's not overwhelming. It's approachable. I don't know if I would put it in the hands of a beginner per se, or somebody smoking their first cigar. But if you're looking for somebody who wants, good, clean, floral, smooth Dominican tobacco, that's the one all day. That's the one that Jochy Blanco smokes when we're down there. He's smoking that one all the time. The second cigar we blended was it's called the Deseret. It's our Maduro, and so it's a Mexican San Andres Maduro. It's a 5 1/4 by 54 Robusto, and it's got a Dominican binder, and then it's got filler from the DR and Nicaragua. We picked filler tobacco from the two regions in each country that are known for sweeter tobacco. So it's a really rich, creamy, flavorful. I get a lot of, like almost a chocolate note out of that, like a dark chocolate, maybe some burnt coffee, some of those Nicaraguan flavors you can really pick out. That one is, I would only call it a medium plus. It's not a full bodied cigar, full strength cigar. The smoke on that thing pours. It just drips smoke. It's really thick, coats the palate well. That's a great after dinner smoke. That's my dessert. A lot of times I'll have that one at the end of the day with a nice bourbon, or like a stout beer. So that one, I wouldn't put it in the hands of a beginner. If you wanted to, as a beginner, kind of contrast, something mild with something a little more full flavored, that's a good way to do a contrast, and I don't think it would overwhelm anybody. But there's a lot of flavors in there. There's a lot to pick up. So the third one we blended is called the Liahona. It's a Connecticut, Ecuadorian Connecticut, again with a San Andres binder. And then we've got filler from the DR and a little bit from Paraguay in there for the filler. It's a cool, like 6 1/4 by 45 ring gauge. So it's almost like a Lonsdale, but it's a torpedo. So it's a cool shape. It's a unique shape. Very mild, very creamy. It's got a nutty profile to it, kind of like roasted cashews is what I get out of it the most. That's good for literally any time of day. You can smoke it in the morning, but it is just as good like for an after dinner smoke. It holds up. I do that one with my coffee every morning. So that one, I would say a beginner could totally approach for sure. It's not going to overwhelm anybody. It's not super strong, but very flavorful, especially for a Connecticut. And then the last one that just dropped, our fourth blend is called the Feathered Serpent. It's a Candela. The Candela is different on here. It's not your typical Ecuadorian Candela, and I don't know how well you can see it in this light. That kind of gets washed out, but it's a very dark green Corojo seed, actually grown in the Dominican Republic by Jochy for this cigar. So it's a little thicker than your usual Candela wrapper, and it's a little sweeter. It doesn't have that grassy note to it. We used a San Andres binder again, and then it's all Dominican filler with no ligero. So we had to use other primings to make sure that it burns right. But it's pretty mild. I'd put this one at like mild to medium. It's a little more stout than the Connecticut, but not much. It's got a really creamy, sweet profile to it. This is a good beginner cigar too, if you can convince somebody to smoke a green cigar for the first time.
Well, some people might find like that, the fact that it's different to be a reason that they would want to smoke it.
Right. It's one of those, like, so with the Candela, they stopped the fermentation process very early on to maintain that green chlorophyll look to it. And a lot of times with that, you can get that really fresh cut grass or like hay profile. This one, because of the type of seed it is and the soil it was grown in, I really don't get those grassy flavors out of this. They're in there, but they're really soft. It's more of a creamy profile. So I think it's a good one for beginners because it might play on the palate a little better. You know what I mean? It might excite the palate a little more.
At this point in the show, I usually ask 2 questions of all the guests. So I'm going to ask those questions to you now.
Okay.
The first of those questions is, what is your why, or what is your motivation to do what you do?
I'm always seeking knowledge, man. My why is I'm a cigar nerd, and I like learning, and this facilitates my ability to learn something new every day. I'm also a people person. I love connecting with people, being out on the road, being in new shops, being in new states, new cities. I get to meet people all the time, and I love that. I feel like people in the cigar crowd are just salt of the earth. There's some assholes out there, but they know who they are, and you know who they are. You know what I mean? So it's easy to discern. For the most part, you're meeting just cool people with cool stories that you wouldn't have talked to otherwise. And I do it for my family. I want to set something up. I want to leave something lasting, hopefully, for my kids. And if they're into it, and if they pick it up down the road, that's awesome. Everybody wants a legacy, right? And if this goes away when I go away, hey, cool. I got to spend my life doing something I really love.
the next question is, someone comes to you, they have an idea for a business. It might not necessarily be a cigar business or related to tobacco, but they have an idea for a business, but they have no idea how to get started. What's your tip for that kind of new entrepreneur to get them get them on the right path as they're getting out there?
I would go back to your first question. I would say, what's your why? I would ask them what the motivation is. Why do they want to do what it is they say they're going to do? Because if they can answer that clearly, then the rest kind of is just logistics, right? So as far as logistics goes, what's your business model? Who's your target audience?
Mm-hmm.
What are you going to do to ensure quality behind whatever it is that you're creating? How personally invested are you going to be? Are you going to be on the sideline? Are you going to be in the trenches? What's your involvement? I would say my whole point to that would be trying to make sure they know what they're getting themselves into, because it might look cool and fun on paper, but when that ball starts rolling, you got to be the one pushing the ball. It's not going to roll by itself. Somebody's got to grind. So make sure they're ready for the grind.
I think I have time for a bonus question. So, at some point, if you ever get to the point of collaborating with somebody in the industry, what's one, other cigar brand or cigar person or manufacturer that you wish that maybe you could do a collaboration with?
Hell yeah. I mean, there's a ton, man. There's so many. That's a tough question, right?
I know. You have to choose just one.
Yeah. Okay. So I only get to pick one.
You only can pick one.
You know what? Honestly, if I'm only picking one, he makes our cigars for us, but we haven't actually collaborated vision-wise with Jochy Blanco. Okay. I would love to collaborate with Jochy and have his perspective on blending and flavor profiles and all of his knowledge get meshed up with what we're trying to do and collaborate with Jochy. If I had to pick one, that would be the guy. Obviously, there are others. Nick Melillo gets an honorable mention. And Aganorsa, I would love to work with Aganorsa. Matt Booth, I would love to collaborate with Matt Booth. He's a fucking weirdo, and I love that. So there's a lot, but Jochy would have to be at the top of the list just because of who he is and what he's done for us, and I would love to see what he could do with our brand in mind.
Awesome. I think that'll be very interesting. So maybe you should, since next time you're down there.
I'm gonna be down there in 2 weeks, so now I have something to talk about for sure. Yeah,
definitely. For those people who are not watching this and who are just listening to this, can you tell them what website they need to visit for more information and what the social media handles are for them to kind of keep up with you and your brand?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're definitely most active on social media, both Facebook and Instagram. It's at Apostate Cigars. The website is apostatecigars.com. It's kind of under construction right now, but that will be cleaned up soon. But yeah, the social media, easiest way to interact with us. You can find my email address on there as well. It's Brandon at apostatecigars.com. You can reach out to me directly. I'm happy to talk to anybody.
Awesome. Well, I want to thank you for coming on today. And like I said, you'll have to come on again, do a follow-up show, and maybe we can get Kendrick on as well. I think it'll be interesting to ask him some of the same questions to get his perspective, but also just to chat and get to know you all a little bit more. Like I said, it's a very exciting brand. So I congratulate you for what you've accomplished so far, just because it is a buzzworthy brand. But I don't think in the cigar industry you can be buzzworthy without having an actual good product. So
right. That's where it's at for me too. Yeah, we can talk about it all day and try to tell you how good it is, or you can light one up and understand what the hype's about, I guess. Right? Yeah. No, Thank you. We appreciate the opportunity, man. We'll be back for sure.
Awesome. So I want to thank Brandon for coming on, and I want to thank you all for watching. If you're watching on Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter, make sure you hit that like or subscribe button. And if you're listening to this on any of the podcasting platforms like Apple Podcasts or Spotify or iHeartRadio, just make sure you hit that subscribe button and leave a review if you don't mind. The reviews you can comment on the good things you like, and then you can also say some things that you don't like. It's not going to hurt my feelings. I think there's always room for improvement. So it's all open game for me. Just leave a review, please. So if you missed any of this episode, I think this is episode 114. So there's 113 more hour-long episodes for you to get caught up on. So you can go to deepcutslive.com or you can go to youtube.com/deepcutslive. Either place, you'll find all the videos there and some bonus videos as well. And like I said, we'll have to have Brandon back on in the future. And I think we have another podcast coming up next week. But like I said, there's plenty to catch up on either way. So thank you, everyone, for watching. And until next time.